Are we not beginning to tackle that now? I mean, one of the things that we're finding is that we have a national conference. We've seen several attempts by our members of the National Assembly to do something about that as well. But, you know, owing to the fact that it would seem that we're losing faith there, we clamored for a national conference and voila, we have it. So are you also optimistic that things could eventually change in terms of laws that would empower states to do what they need to do?
First, I salute the effort of government in calling for the national conference. Beautiful thing that it has done. Very, very good. What I fear is how that conference will impact positively on the situation in changing the status quo ante. The status quo in Nigeria is such that you have a conference that does not even have the enabling law establishing it. There's no enabling law. But then let's take it to, let's assume that we can be gentlemen, and as gentlemen that we're going to play by the rules. I can prophesy, for example, to say that the national conference that we have now will work to the benefits of the Nigerian nation. I pray so. I pray so.
Do we take solace somewhat in what we're beginning to see, where some states are beginning to have their capital expenditure higher than that of recurrent?
Of course. You take some states, for example, Benue State.
We also have to look at the quality of that.
Yes, look at the quality. I mean, in Osun State is trying that too, trying to equalize its capital budget with the current expenditure. And that's good. And you're creating wealth, yes. And then you are developing or maintaining existing infrastructure. That's also correct. Even at the level of states, states perform better than the federal government in an attempt to equalize or even reduce recurrent expenditure vis-a-vis the capital expenditure.
Really?
The states are better, of course.
I thought most states just wait for this allocation from government.
They're better off. Lagos State, for example, is better off. Lagos creates more wealth, for example, build more schools, build more roads, maintain them, than the federal government does to all the networks of the network of federal roads in Nigeria.
No, but isn't that of Lagos understandable? But other states that depend on the resources of the government, and at the end of the day, it's a monthly thing. So if you get that funds, they go back and what happens?
The internally generated revenue credentials of Lagos State, for example, is highly statutory. No state in Nigeria generates more internal revenue than Lagos State. I mean, but then you will see that under the transfer, the 13% transfer to the oil-producing states, Lagos benefits nothing. Delta State, for example, is better than Lagos State in terms of that area. River State, Ondo State even has about between 2 and about 3% transferred to it from the 13%. But then you will see that the internal tax effort is a function of an intellectual leadership. You cannot separate good leadership from intellectualism. You need some people that will just sit down, brainstorm, and bring out ideas that can develop states. It is not enough to just have money thrown at you.
But that issue of taxation now,
yes.
It's not the personal income tax.
Of course,
we're talking about like company tax and all the other taxes.
Consumption, land use.
Okay,
yes.
But that also means the state government needs to create that environment that can allow for establishment of private concerns. Do we have this kind of environment right now? Conducive enough?
Conducive enough. Well, I will score some states 4 out of 10. For example, I will score Lagos 5 out of 10. Akwa Ibom, I can score about 4 out of 10.
Why?
Well, yes, because they are putting the infrastructure, for example, in education, putting the infrastructure in terms of environment and trying as much as possible to do something with respect to balancing what goes out with what comes in terms of revenue generation effort.
But people are still complaining about multiple taxation.
Oh, yes. Everywhere. In all economies, you will complain of multiple taxation, especially if you have a skewed federal system, as we do have. If you have a skewed federal system, for example, why should the federal government, for example, begin to argue with the states on the issue of the sovereign wealth fund or taxation with respect to hotels and tourism, for example?
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, what should we be doing to address this? Because we've talked about some of the areas we need to focus on as a country, both the states and federal government, to see how we can get ourselves out of this and get the population liquid.
Yes. Number one, the federal government, of course, the national conference, I pray that the national conference take the bull by the hand by devolving power. Actually, seizing power from the federal government and transferring it to the states.
That's a strong one.
Yes, because
I think devolve is better.
Yes, of course, that's what we need to do, because you have an omnibus federal government, that's overdoing things and actually doing too little.
One would say that this is not necessarily the fault of the federal government, in the sense that this is what has been asked to do by the Constitution.
It is the fault of the federal government. This federal government was a creation of the federal military government. A federal military government that never cared a hoot what happens to the states.
And you've seen the difficulty we've had, because, you know, the federal military government finally wrote the Constitution that was transferred to the federal democratic government.
Yes.
So, I mean, you've seen what difficulty we've had in trying to change, you know, some of the things that we inherited from our military era. Do you appreciate some of those difficulties?
I do, but we need the political will, the sagacity, you know, a desire to help your nation. I mean, we need some militancy from the federal government itself, because it is very difficult to ask those who are benefiting from the existing status quo ante to now surrender that benefits to some other people. I mean, it's going to be very difficult. You have a station in which the federal government is in seigniorage, is in stamp duties, the federal government is in tourism, the federal government is in borders and other things like that. 68 items. And then you now say, okay, well, we're going to reduce it to 32. It can be Herculean convincing the federal government to accept such a reduction.
So that's why I asked you earlier. I know you just answered it, you know, perhaps you don't want to go into it, as to what exactly you make of this national conference. I mean, are you really, from what you've seen so far, do you think that we really can make headway? Because if we need to address extreme poverty,
yes,
you know, a situation whereby more than half our population are absolutely poor.
Absolutely.
You know, it is a matter of national importance. And
Yes.
do you think that this confab can help us out?
Yes, this confab is good. It's a good idea. And it's high time we started supporting it. It's a very good idea. And because good idea to the extent that it will achieve the purpose of devolving powers to the states. If it does not achieve that, then it would have been an exercise in futility.
That's subject to the recommendations being accepted by the National Assembly and all the parties involved.
Well,
Okay, let's take a break. We'll be back and continue on this one, so please join us again. Welcome back to Sunrise. They continue our focus on this World Bank report, but now we'll talk about the budget, the 2014 budget. We'll still have a budget historian here, Dr. Tunji Ogunyemi. Now, looking at the budget, does this contribute somewhat to what we're going through with this report by the World Bank now? Because it's the second quarter. Well, we understand that the reps say the budget should be ready by first quarter of this week. We don't know if it's from the committee level before it comes to the floor of the House, because maybe when they deliberate on that eventually. And now we're still going back in circles. The same challenge we have with our budget year in, year out. We're back at it.
on this platform last year, we did mention the issue of delays in the passing of budget. I remember very vividly that we did suggest then that the solution is actually in multi-year budget. Multi-year budgeting, you cannot rule
That's
out
how many?
advantage.
4, 5 years?
Yes, like in 3-4 years, for example. If a government comes to power, for example, it should not write more than 2 budgets. One budget for the first term, and if it's lucky to get the second term, another budget for the second term. And that should end it. That way you stop these oscillation between MTF, approvals of benchmarks.
I was just going to tell you that we have the MTEF, because I remember that we asked the legislator once, and you know, he quickly pointed at the fact that we have the MTEF. Isn't that some, you know, 3-year plan that we should be following? Doesn't that help?
But the MTEF sets only the maximum and the minimum expenditure limits, and the maximum expenditure limits are cross-board for about 3 or 4 years. So it is not the budget. The budget is the Annual Appropriation Act that shall have to be passed by the legislation. According to Section 81, Section 82 of the CFR 1999, it must be passed annually. The president must lay it at any time in the financial year for every. And the Nigerian financial year is defined as January 1 to December 31. So there's a disconnect between our MTEF and the periodization for our budget.
Do you think that we should redefine what the financial, would that help?
It's high time we did that.
Because
It will.
because it would seem that to be able to affect something, what we'll have to do is also, amend the Constitution
Of course,
again, and
yes.
that might take a longer period. Perhaps if we just, amended what the definition of a financial year meant. Is that possible in the very first instance?
That's absolutely
Because everyone knows
possible.
a year is about 12 months.
No, just 12 months. And within the 12 months, you spent three months, the first quarter, haggling and arguing on the issues of even setting the minimum expenditure limits for the budget. Is it not just advisable to just sit down and say, look, let's plan for 3-4 years. That way we will not be rewriting the budget every other year. I mean, for example, this year's budget was too late. It was late in December. So, and the process for passing the budget process is extremely tortuous and has to be careful.
When do you recommend it be laid?
It be late, July. July.
Or the middle of the year.
Yes, because it is possible to project. Because those who are at the budget office should be prophets, really. They should be able to prophesy. They should be able to see very far into the future to say, yes, this is what we want.
Based on the figures.
Based on the figures. The figures are there. Statisticians are available. We have the human resources.